so much for being here. We're lucky enough today to have Fiona Hathorn with us. Fiona launched in 2012 the Women on Boards UK, which has helped over 1,800 women and men achieve board level in their own organizations or to take on a non-executive role. I wanted to ask you just a little bit about why you believe diversity of thought is so important at the board level, because you've devoted so much of your time to this.
I have, and yes, I'll give you some extra metrics there. One of the things that my organisation does is advertise board roles for free, and I know we'll come on to why boards aren't advertising roles transparently later, but we've advertised about 20,000 board roles for free. Most people don't know where they are, and our success metrics are about now 2,500, so I'm super proud of that. And I think what's interesting when you say we help men as well, we do, because we do a lot of work with corporates, and there's nothing gender specific about the boardroom. Historically, there haven't been very many men in it. So when we're working with corporates, we're very, very happy to run corporates for men as well. They're just as interested in the boardroom if they haven't had exposure to it. So delighted to help men as well. But yes, your question was with regard to why it matters. It is about diversity of thought. If you have diverse teams, whether it's at the board level or within a company, diversity confers different expertise. And if you recruit from the same pot, from the same backgrounds, from the same experience, from the same street, from the same school, from the same people, you tend to get similar type of experiences and backgrounds. If you have different types of people, the research is very clear, you get more innovation. Problem solving is better. And interestingly, the research also suggests that it changes the way you think. And I love looking at research, and there's some fantastic research coming out of America years ago, where they got a lot of Democrat students and got a lot of Republican students and said, we're going to take one of you and ask you to speak to the other political group, and vice versa. And you could talk about anything, it didn't have to be politics. But what they found is the minute you thought you were going into an environment where you thought people might not think or have the same, in this case, political views at you, you worked harder. You worked harder on your presentation, you got your points across, you made sure it was backed up with data in a way that you wouldn't have done, possibly being a bit lazy with the group that you thinks in a similar way. And just to sort of conclude that, and I can go on to more research on R&D as a percentage of assets, if you have racial diversity, which is related to stock price performance and all that sort of stuff. But one of the things that's really exciting at the moment is the regulators are getting involved, the governance institutes. I know you're involved in this. So, and this is one of the things that the Bank of England have said recently. Andrew Bailey, the new governor of the Bank of England. And I love this comment. How a firm approaches diversity and inclusion tells us a lot about its culture, the way we do things around here. And the way a firm handles non-financial misconduct, bullying, for example, is potentially relevant in our assessment of the firm in the same way they're handling insider dealing, market manipulation, and other forms of misconduct. And that's critical in terms of financial services. But it all starts in the boardroom, because the boardroom sets the tone, the culture, and oversees the strategy and all these other things, which I know we're going to talk about later. So it's absolutely crucial. And what I think is interesting when people talk about gender diversity, there's a fantastic IMF study which shows when you get more women at the top, i.e. over 60%, the performance starts going down again. It's not about women. Now, people talk about gender. Gender is something we can count and see, but it's very, very clear that diverse teams perform better. But I can talk to you about who's getting involved and why and how we're shifting the needle or not in different sectors later. But the research is out there, not clear that everyone's yet reading it.
Thank you. That's really interesting. One of the questions I had about the diversity of thought was about the diversity of values also. I recently came across the Earth Charter, and they talk a lot about diversity of values and the behavior coming out of values. I wondered what you thought about that.
I mean, when you look at diversity, you can write codes of conduct. Everyone can read it. We can all start ticking the boxes. You see companies just rolling their eyes. It's observing behavior. And behavior is interrelated with your values, which of course is interrelated to what your purpose is in life, what your company's purpose is in life, what your director's view of people and employees are. So it's all about values are extremely important. And certainly in the younger generation coming through, and where, I mean, we'll talk about ESG, environmental, social and governance later, it's all interrelated, but values, there's no point having a policy, putting it on your website, and then employees, customers and shareholders seeing it happening in different ways. And that's behavior, and that's related to your values. You either believe it or you don't.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So are you seeing progress? You've had women on boards for about 10 years. Are you seeing progress in the culture of the boardroom?
Yes, you've definitely seen a huge amount of progress, and I can talk to you about some numbers. I know we're going to talk about, numbers, and certainly looking at other forms of diversity on the boards. I'm seeing progress. Companies are talking about their boardroom, their diversity. I'm not seeing a huge amount of progress within the companies, but certainly all companies in terms of diversity, not just in the boardroom, but within the companies, they're setting up minority networks, they're discussing it, they're talking to their headhunters saying, we need more diversity on this shortlist. They might specify women. They might say to the headhunter, we will not, the long list has to have at least 50-50 or 30-70. So it's talked about a lot. It's still very, very hard to get onto the long list from the headhunter perspective or the company perspective. And you've really got to make sure that even if you set a little target in terms of long list and short list, clearly you want to recruit the best candidate. But the interview process and the panel and the way in which you engage with a diverse candidate really does matter, because they have choice too. And what I think you are seeing, and I've seen, is the lens on diversity in the boardroom has made it more difficult to get a board position for everyone, men as well as women, and for ethnic minorities. And what it's actually done is raise the bar and raise the standard and force companies to fish a little bit wider. We talk it in terms of turn off the spotlight, in terms of the people you know, and turn off the floodlights, and it's amazing what you get. But the whole process of recruitment takes longer. The onboarding and engagement of that diverse candidate requires more thought and requires more effort. And the research is also very clear, is diverse teams are harder to manage. So again, the chair is crucial. We know the chair's relationship with the chief executive is crucial. The chair sets the agenda. The chair controls the conversations in the meeting. So again, how you embrace that change. So yes, things have progressed enormously, and it's lovely to see, but it's still pretty tough, and it's still pretty tortuous. And anybody who thinks job done is having a laugh.
So in the next 10 years, what sorts of changes would you like to see?
I've sort of pulled up some data on where we are in terms of the FTSE, for example, in the UK, but also looking globally. And most countries, whether they've set quotas or taken the voluntary approach that we are taking, have seen progress in the boards of their big companies, and most are hovering around 25 to 30%. In some cases a little bit higher, which of course is great to see. And they've come from, on average, 10 years ago, at 10 to 12%. So that's huge progress, which is exciting. But when you move outside the large listed companies, the progress is less good. When you look at the progress for female chief executives, it is very poor indeed. And I've got the latest data on the FTSE 350, which is 5%. So that's the 100 top companies in the UK and the 250. But if you go outside that, you're seeing it around 4%. And that hasn't shifted and moved at all. There's been a bit of movement on female chairs globally, but yes, it's very nice to see. You're seeing interesting things happening in the United States, which of course is interesting because you've got state law and US law as well, so it gets more complicated. But you're seeing companies like Goldman Sachs saying, we will not list you unless you have one woman on the board. They're changing that to 2 women on the board. And then, of course, we've got the Black empowerment and the ethnic minority agenda as well. So, we've got a lens now on the number for the FTSE 100 and 250, our largest 350 companies, on the number, the ethnic diversity on boards. And that's taking time to shift as well. And again, outside those large companies in almost every country in the world, the answer is it's not a percentage, it's none.
Wow.
So I think what is quite interesting in terms of what's changing is because of the focus of a spotlight looking at it, we can talk about gender pay gap reporting, which is quite interesting as well. Companies are now being asked by their shareholders about diversity. And I think that has actually only just started in the last 2 or 3 years. Now, I know large index funds, whether it's the BlackRock index funds and the corporate social responsibility, the reporting teams of legal in general, I know they've been talking about it, but I'm talking about the more traditional fund managers who are actually buying and selling the shares, not the index, because that's a bit different. They are beginning to talk about it. Clients are talking about it, saying, we don't want you to list us unless your investment banking team, your mergers and acquisition team looks diverse. What are you doing about it? Because we're being asked, what about you? And so in the very male dominated industries of the asset management still, and investment banking, they're being asked. So there's a lot of, pushing around the edges, which is really exciting to see.
Because I noticed in one of your first answers, you talked about how applicants have a choice as well. It's not all about the leadership choosing, but it's also about people choosing to work somewhere. And so part of what I hear you saying is that they're cultures that maybe you wouldn't want to be part of, that you have to identify that is somewhere you'd want to work. So how does that sort of change happen? I was thinking also about your description of what it was like for you as a mother, and that maybe that wasn't typical even to have the kind of accommodation you described. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Gosh, there's lots of comments in there. Yes, the tall thing. I haven't had somebody quote me back on that one. A lot of companies. I just want to raise on that. A lot of companies are moving to try and fix the minority. So let's go in and support the women and make them more confident, make them able to stand up, and make them get their voice heard. And I'm all for supporting people actively managing their careers and making sure they're owning their careers. And for women in general, because we do have to give birth, you mentioned children, that's assuming you want children. So it's about saying, okay, this is what am I going to do after I've had children? What is my plan? What do I need to do to get to where I want to go? And there's a degree to which in society it's deeply ingrained at 4, we've changed our minds. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do to actively manage, but it's not about fixing the minority. Now, if you join the boardroom, so let's get back to governance in the boardroom, you are personally liable for what happens in that company collectively. Now, you can mitigate the risk, and the law isn't out to jail and imprison all of you if you do the right thing. And that's all the law is expecting you to do, abide by the Companies Act. And do the right thing for the long-term survivability of the company. So, but regardless of that, people are realizing that I need to like the board as much as the board likes me. And due diligence when you take on a board position is really important. Number one, care about the organization. Whether it's a charity, whether it's a university. I don't wish to be rude to anybody who sits on boards, and I've been involved in a number of boards, but board meetings can be very boring. There's a lot of governance processes that you need to go to make sure that you are overseeing what's going on within the organization. And therefore, if you are not comfortable with the people sitting around the table, because when you leave the boardroom, you need to abide by the decisions that have been made by the board, even if you disagreed with them, because in the best will in the world, you're not always right. So that's why it's important for you to do your due diligence on the organization, the due diligence on the rest of the board, the due diligence on the chair's relationship with the CEO. Is the CEO about to resign? Has there been any issues that ought to be raised? So that's important. So I think a lot of companies are saying, yes, I want that famous diverse candidate that I've heard about. And that diverse candidate say, well, you might want me, but I'm not so sure about you. And I think it's all very interesting. And I think the whole empowerment, speak up movement has made people much happier to give their voice. So I'm not comfortable with that. So it means that boards are having to work harder. And isn't that fantastic? Because it means the quality and the governance and the standards will be raised higher, which is, I'm not sure I've answered all of your questions there. So chuck me another one if I've missed something.
Oh, thank you. You did a great job with that. I appreciate it. One of the reasons I brought up the height issue was I was thinking about the listening that you talked about being so important, and that maybe and I've been studying the future of work a little bit, and that leadership is changing, and what is expected from a leader is changing, and we're moving from this sort of top-down approach, and the bias toward height seems like a might makes right kind of bias that is sort of, and that now we're moving into something where you need to be more collaborative. But I'm wondering, where are these skills going to come from? So that's a question, like where
Well,
yeah.
in terms of where the skills are coming from, I do quite a lot of talks, both to boards, but to teams of women and women's networks. And the glass ceiling has been broken. And I'm a great sort of podcast listener, and I can give you a famous, fabulous, diverse male or female and anywhere in the world, and they've broken the glass ceiling. When you listen to their stories, they have a very strong sense of self. They've often been brought up by very different parents in different situations. They've been grafting. They always want to do it better. They always want to challenge. Something's given them that right. And I'm coming on to that because there's a reason, I think, why I'm small. I'm 5'2". And there's a reason why I felt entitled to sit at the table. I felt entitled for my voice to be heard. But you'd have to meet my father and my mother. But you'd actually have to meet my father's mother to know what a strong leader she was in a very poor area, running the corner shop. So my father was an only child, and so his view of women and what they could do was fundamentally different than most people in my school. And he encouraged and supported my mother to work. So my view of how you bring children up, and I knew that if I was happy in who I was going to be a better mother. And as luck would have it, I married a man whose mother was the main breadwinner as well. I didn't consciously think about that. So when a child came along, I thought, whose responsible is this? Is this mine or is it yours? You know, what should we do here? And it wasn't a difficult conversation. So people are changing the glass ceiling. But I'm very keen on the boardroom matters. So back to my father sat on a number of boards within the community. He was in teaching, he was in the RAF, he did all sorts of different things. But because I had no childcare, I was taken to the boardroom at the age of 4. You know, would you mind sitting there quietly and listening? So I knew about minute taking. I knew about chairing a board. I'd seen disruptive boards. I wasn't aware of the little training program I was going through. And to me, the boardroom is so important. My job, and to anybody listening to this, is I'm planting seeds. I don't care whether you want to be in the boardroom or not. It's choice. I just want you to know that the board exists. And I don't want you to think that the boardroom is only our large listed companies, whether they're listed in Dublin or whether they're listed in London or listed in NASDAQ. I want you to think about, I want you to walk home tonight or sit on a train and say, what's the governance of that building? It might be a hospice, it might be a university, it might be your local arts club, it might be your fetia, it might be your little football club. And that's why I want to open the tin lid in terms of what is governance, because the other thing that we know from a minority of people who haven't exposure, they often need to feel competent and expert into the area going into before they're confident enough to apply. So I say to people, I'm planting seeds today. You're only 20, but actually most people who get to the top in this organization have been on the board before the age of 28. It might be their university debating club. it is still a board with responsibilities, with governance, systems and processes to make it effective and do the right thing. So have a think about it. If you're taking a career break, for whatever reason, it might be looking after aged parents, it might be child rearing, think about going on a school governing board, but where your children are not at school, makes you slightly more independent. And when I say to people, you might be listening here and thinking, does she know anything about my life? Because we do a lot of workshops with corporate. And in fact, we've been to Dublin and done workshops with Bank of New York Mellon and Google and some of the organizations there. And I say, I'm planting a seed today. It may not germinate with you for 5, 10, 15 years time. But timing is everything in life. But be aware you are making a conscious choice to get involved or not get involved. And if you have exposure to the boardroom or knowledge of it, there's proxy board, you're reporting to a board, you're advising a board, you're sitting on a committee within a company. It's a CV differentiator. You're getting leadership knowledge and oversight and risk management and governance and finance and people issues way before you might get it within your company. It's a career development strategy for free, because most boards don't pay. But that's what I think is really important. And that's why, in terms of shifting the needle, knowledge is key. And that's why I'm so passionate about what we do here. And I don't mind who I'm talking to. It's a question of talking to everyone and making people aware.
Thank you. That was brilliant. Thank you, Fiona. That was all really helpful. I think many people will really find it useful, and we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And I'll just end on one thing, my 2 favorite words. It's not rocket science in the boardroom. And you know, Heidi, because you've seen some of my stuff before, it's performance and conformance. Conformance is abiding by the law. It's not difficult. There's a regulator out there, follow the rules. And performance is strategy and stargazing and helping. And remember, it's noses in, fingers out. That's quite difficult for some boards. But thank you very much.
Thank you.